The first thing Ansel Cade saw when he walked down into the valley was the dust. Not wind dust, not trail dust, not the lazy stirring of a dry afternoon. This was the violent circling kind, the dust of something fighting something else, inside a space, too small for the argument. He could see it rising above a corral fence from 300 yards away, thick and golden in the late September light, and from that same distance he could hear the sound of it, the crack of iron-shod hooves against timber. The high, furious scream of a horse that had decided it would rather break every bone in its body than accept what was being asked of it. And underneath all of that, barely audible but absolutely unmistakable, the sound of a woman laughing. Ansel stopped on the ridge and stood there for a moment watching. He was not a man who hurried toward things. He did not understand, and he did not understand this. Below him lay a ranch spread out along a creek bottom, at the base of the Wind River Range, a main house, wood and stone, with a porch that wrapped around two sides, a barn with a new roof on old walls. 3 corrals, 2 of them empty. The third one was where the war was happening. He could see her now. A woman in the corral with a gray mare that must have stood 16 hands and had the kind of chest and hindquarters that meant speed and power and very little interest in being told what to do. And the mare was pitching hard, crow-hopping, spinning, throwing her head with the blind fury of an animal that has confused fear with rage. Any sane person would have been over the fence and halfway to the barn by now. The woman was not over the fence. She was in the center of the corral, moving with the horse, not against it, not chasing, not cornering, not forcing, just present, turning when the mare turned, stepping back when the mare lunged, giving ground without giving up ground, which is a different thing entirely and almost impossible to do unless you understand it in your body and not just in your head. Ansel had broken horses for 11 years. He had seen men who were good at it, men who were strong at it, and men who were cruel at it. He had almost never seen someone who was musical at it. That was the only word that fit. She moved away a fiddler plays, not thinking about the notes, just saying what needed to be said. He watched for a long time, longer than he should have, standing on a ridge above a stranger's ranch with nothing but a saddlebag over his shoulder and 14 cents in his pocket. His boots were worn through at the left heel. His coat had been mended so many times it was more thread than original cloth. He had not eaten since the morning before, and that had been half a biscuit and creek water. He was 23 years old and looked older, the way men look older when the years have asked more of them than years are supposed to ask. But he did not walk down. Not yet. He stood on that ridge and watched the woman work the gray mare, and something in his chest that had been closed for a long time opened just a crack. Not desire, not calculation, something quieter than that. Recognition. The particular, unsettling feeling of watching a stranger do something, and knowing, before a single word has been spoken, that you understand exactly what they are doing, because you have lived inside it yourself. The mare was slowing, not broken, not beaten, just beginning, just barely beginning, to wonder if this woman might be worth listening to. Ansel knew that feeling too. He walked down off the ridge. The Voss Ranch had a name, though most people in Elkhorn had stopped using it. Harlan Voss had called it the ironweed, after the tough purple wildflower that grew along the creek and came back every year, no matter what the weather did to it. His wife Lenora had loved those flowers. She had planted them along the fence line the first spring they were on the land, 1869, and every September they bloomed in a ragged purple line that marked where the Voss property began. Lenora had been gone 7 years now. A birth that went wrong. The baby, too. That was the kind of sentence people said quickly and quietly in Elkhorn, and then changed the subject, because there was no slow version of it that did not leave you standing in someone else's grief, with nowhere to put your hands. Harlan Voss had survived it the way a tree survives a lightning strike. Still standing, still growing leaves, but with a blackened hollow at the center that would never fill in. He had one daughter, Merritt, and she was 20 years old, and she was the reason people in Elkhorn used a different name for the Voss Ranch. They called it the Trouble Place. Not because anything bad happened there. Because of her. Merritt Voss could ride better than any man in the territory. She could rope, she could brand, she could track a stray through heavy timber and have it back before dark. She could read the sky the way her father read a ledger and tell you within 4 hours when the weather would turn. She had broken 9 horses in the past 2 years, horses that professional breakers had walked away from. And she had done it without a whip, without a twitch, and without the casual cruelty that most men considered standard practice. She also spoke her mind. She wore trousers. She swore when the situation warranted it, which by her estimation was more often than most people allowed. She had turned down 3 marriage proposals in 2 years, the last one from the son of Aldous Crane, who owned the biggest spread in the county and was not a man accustomed to hearing the word no. In Elkhorn they said she was too wild for any man. They said Harlan had ruined her by raising her like a son after Lenora died. They said it was a shame, because the ironweed was good land, 600 acres of mountain grass and creek bottom with water rights that went back to the original survey, and it deserved a man's hand on it. They said these things in the general store and at the church social and in the back room of Aldous Crane's office, and they said them with the particular confidence of people who have confused their own discomfort with someone else's failing. What they did not say, because they either did not notice or did not care, was that the ironweed was the best-run small ranch in the territory. The fences were tight, the cattle were healthy, the horses were sound. Merritt Voss had held that place together through 2 hard winters and a summer drought that had broken ranches twice its size, and she had done it with her father's failing health and no hired help that lasted longer than a month. Because that was the other problem. Harlan Voss was sick. He did not talk about it, and Merritt did not talk about it, and the doctor in Elkhorn had been told not to talk about it, but it was there in every room of that house like furniture. No one would move. A cough that had started in the spring and had not stopped. A weariness that showed in the time it took him to cross the yard in the morning, and in the way he stood at the window some afternoons watching Merritt work, with the expression of a man trying to memorize something he was afraid he would not be around to see for much longer. He was 57 years old, and he moved like a man of 70. And the distance between those 2 numbers was the distance between what the ironweed needed and what Harlan Voss could give it. They needed help. Harlan knew it. Merritt knew it. But every hand Harlan had hired was a new version of the same disappointment. One had stolen gear and left. One had cut every corner he could find. One had told Merritt to her face that the ranch needed a man in charge. And one, the last one, had tried to kiss her in the barn, and she had corrected that mistake with the nearest solid object. And Harlan had stood on the porch and watched the man ride away bleeding and had not said a single word to stop him. That was September of 1883. And that was the morning that Ansel Cade walked down off the ridge. Ansel came into the yard on foot. He did not go to the house. He walked to the corral where the woman was standing with the gray mare, which had settled enough to stand with its head lowered, breathing hard, one ear forward and one ear back. The ear forward was the one pointed at the woman. That was progress, and Ansel knew it. He stopped 20 feet from the fence and waited. This was something most people did not know how to do and did not value, the art of arriving somewhere and not immediately filling it with yourself, of letting the space decide when it was ready for you. The woman turned. She did not look startled. She did not look welcoming. She measured him with a direct, unhurried attention that gave nothing away until she had decided what she was looking at. "You are on private land," she said. "I know. I can see the fence line markers. I apologize. I am looking for work." She leaned against the corral rail. Her hair was dark and tied back with a strip of leather, and there was dust on her face and sweat on her neck and a long scratch along her left forearm where the mare had likely pushed her into the fence. She did not appear to have noticed the scratch. She did not appear to notice most things about herself, which Ansel found interesting because she appeared to notice everything else. "We are not hiring," she said. I heard differently in Elkhorn. Her eyes changed, not anger, exactly. More like a door that had been half open swinging toward closed. "You heard that we cannot keep a hand," she said. "That is what you heard. And you walked up here thinking you would be different. I do not know if I would be different. I know I can work." From inside the house, a door opened. A man came onto the porch. Tall, thin in the wrong places, with the kind of careful posture that belongs to someone managing pain they do not intend to discuss. He held a coffee cup in one hand and looked at Ansel with the unhurried, thorough attention of a man who has spent his life reading animals and has applied the same skill to people. "Merritt," he said. His voice was quiet but carried across the yard like it had been built to cover distance. "Who is this? Says he is looking for work." Harlan Voss came down off the porch. He walked slowly, and Ansel saw the effort in it, the careful placement of each step, and understood immediately that this man was sicker than he appeared. Ansel knew that kind of arithmetic. He had watched his own mother do it for 2 years before the end. Harlan stopped at the fence and studied Ansel. The mended coat, the worn boots, the saddlebag over one shoulder, and no horse in sight. "What is your name?" Harlan asked. "Ansel Cade. I have been working horses and cattle since I was 12. Where? South mostly. Started in the Panhandle, worked my way through New Mexico and up through Colorado." "Why did you leave Colorado?" Harlan asked. "The work ended," Ansel said. It was true. It was not all of the truth, and Harlan heard that the way a man hears a fence post that sounds hollow when you knock on it, a thing that stands but is not solid all the way through. Merritt had come to the fence. She stood beside her father, arms crossed, and Ansel felt the full weight of being assessed by 2 people who did not agree with each other about most things, but who agreed completely about the protection of what was theirs. "That mare you were working," Ansel said. He turned to Merritt. "You have got her listening with the left ear but not the right. She has an old injury on the right side of her poll, probably from a halter that was too tight before you got her. She flinches from pressure on that side, which means she will never trust a hand coming from the right until someone retrains that response specifically. It can be done. It takes about 3 weeks of groundwork from the offside." Merritt stared at him. She said nothing, but she uncrossed her arms, which was the first thing she had done since he arrived that was not a wall. "Your north pasture fence is sagging in 4 places," Ansel continued, turning to Harlan. "Your cattle are bunching in the southeast corner, which means something is pushing them away from the creek. Could be predator pressure, could be bad water upstream. And your barn hinge on the east side is about to give, which you probably know but have not gotten to, because there are only so many hours and only so many hands. I am not looking for wages, meals, and a place to sleep. I will work a week, and if you do not want me here after that, I will walk on and you will owe me nothing." Harlan turned to his daughter. Merritt turned to the gray mare. The mare had both ears forward now, watching Ansel with the particular attention that horses reserve for people who have said something interesting in a language they did not expect to hear. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The wind moved through the yard and carried the smell of sage and cooling earth. Merritt shook her head. "No, she said it without heat, without cruelty. Just the flat, final syllable of someone who has arrived at this particular crossroads enough times to know exactly where every path leads. We have done this before," she said. She was talking to her father, but she was watching Ansel when she said it, and her eyes held the specific weariness of a person delivering news they are tired of being right about. She held up one hand and began counting. Garrett Sims stayed 11 days. Could not take instruction from a woman. Left his gear in the bunkhouse and rode out while we were moving cattle. and we were short a bridle and a set of farrier tools when he went. She raised a second finger. Donovan Park. 17 days. Worked well enough when someone was watching. The moment my back was turned, he cut every corner there was to cut and invented a few new ones. I found 3 fence joints he had twisted instead of spliced, and every one of them came apart in the first wind. A third finger. Wade Healy. 22 days, had opinions about how a ranch should be run and who should be running it. Told me to my face that my father ought to sell the operation to someone who knew what they were doing. Meant a man. Did not have the courage to say it plainly, which I found worse than the opinion itself. She paused. And then there was Ellis Byrne. She said. Her voice changed on that name. Not softer. Harder. But in the way things get hard when they're covering something still tender underneath. Ellis Byrne lasted 5 weeks. He was good with horses, competent with cattle, polite at the table. My father liked him. She glanced at Harlan. Harlan studied the ground. And then, one evening in the barn, he decided that a woman who works like a man must want to be treated like something other than one. I corrected that assumption with my right hand, and the nearest solid object, which happened to be the heel of a hoof-pick. Ansel said nothing. There was nothing to say, and he understood that saying nothing was the only response that would not make this worse. Merritt turned to him. So you will understand, Mr. Cade, that when a man walks onto this property with patched boots and no references, and a story that has gaps in it, the size of the Wind River Canyon, my first instinct is not to offer him supper. She was not wrong. Everything she had said was earned. Every refusal was a scar from a lesson she had not asked to learn. Ansel nodded. I understand, he said. And I am not any of those men. Merritt almost smiled, and it was the coldest almost smile Ansel had ever seen. They all said that, Mr. Cade, every single one. She turned and walked back to the corral where the gray mare was standing, watching all of this with the alert, skeptical interest of an animal who had heard enough human conversation to form opinions about it. Merritt put her hand on the mare's neck, and the mare leaned into her, and the two of them stood there together, like two creatures who had learned the same lesson from different directions. Trust is expensive and most people cannot afford it. Harlan had not moved. He stood at the fence with his coffee cup and the slow internal calculation of a man weighing his daughter's judgment against his own desperation. He knew she was right. He also knew that they could not survive another winter alone, and that the distance between those two truths was a space in which something had to give. He opened his mouth. Ansel could see the refusal forming, polished smooth by repetition until it came out without effort or thought. No, Harlan began, and that was when the screaming started. It came from the south. Not the corral, not the barn, not any of the spaces where sound was expected on a working ranch in the late afternoon. It came from beyond the tree line, from the direction of the creek, and it was not a human sound. It was a horse. A horse in genuine terror, the kind of scream that strips away everything an animal has learned about living alongside people and reduces it to the one ancient instruction that has kept horses alive for 1,000,000 years. Run. Merritt was over the corral fence before the sound finished. She moved with the speed of someone who does not think about moving, who has lived so close to animals for so long that their fear enters her body as her own. She was already scanning the tree line, already reading the landscape, already running. From the porch, Harlan gripped the railing, and Ansel saw the cost of that single motion in the way his knuckles whitened and his jaw set against whatever was happening inside his chest. Harlan wanted to run. His body would not let him. "To south pasture," Harlan said. His voice was strained. "There are 2 yearlings down by the creek. We have had a cat working the timber for 3 weeks. Mountain lion?" He turned to Ansel with an expression that was not a request and not a command, but something in between, something that lived in the territory where pride meets necessity, and neither one wins cleanly. I cannot run, Harlan said, and she should not go alone. Ansel did not answer. He had already spotted the rifle leaning inside the porch door. He grabbed it and ran. Through the yard, past the barn, through the gate that Merritt had left swinging open. He could see her ahead of him, running flat out toward the creek where the tree line thickened into heavy pine and deep shadow. Another scream from the yearling. Closer now, and worse. There was a new sound underneath it, a high, wet, desperate sound that Ansel knew. An animal that has been hit, an animal that is down. He ran harder. His worn boots slipped on the grass, and he caught himself and kept going. Ahead of him, Merritt disappeared into the tree line without hesitation, without slowing, without looking back to see if anyone was behind her. And that, Ansel thought as he crashed into the trees after her, was either the bravest thing he had ever seen or the most reckless. And the difference between those two might depend entirely on what they found on the other side. The creek opened up in front of him. He could see the first yearling, a bay, standing rigid, with its head high, and every muscle locked in the ancient paralysis of an animal that cannot decide between running and dying. Beyond it, half in the water, the second yearling was down on its side, thrashing, and there was blood on the rocks and blood in the creek, and a long, deep rake of claw marks across its hindquarter that told the whole story, in 4 red lines. Merritt was between the cat and the downed yearling. She had no weapon. She was standing in the creek with water up to her shins, waving her arms and shouting, putting her own body between 140 pounds of mountain lion and the animal it had already decided to kill. The cat was on the far bank, crouched, still, its tail moving in that slow, rhythmic sweep that means it has not yet decided to leave. It was watching Merritt with the flat, golden patience of a creature that does not understand hurry and does not practice mercy and has never encountered something it considered a serious threat. Ansel raised the rifle. He did not aim at the cat. He aimed 6 inches above its head at the granite boulder behind it and fired. The sound cracked across the creek bottom like a whip laid against the sky. The bullet hit stone, and the fragment sprayed outward, and the cat flinched, all of it happening in the same half-second, the echo rolling up the canyon walls until the whole valley rang with it. The cat moved. Not the explosive bolt of a truly frightened animal, but the fluid, low retreat of a predator that has decided the arithmetic no longer works in its favor. It slipped backward into the tree line, and then it was gone. And the place where it had been was just rocks and shadow, and the fading memory of something ancient and completely indifferent to human plans. Ansel lowered the rifle. His hands were steady. They had always been steady when they needed to be. Merritt was already on her knees beside the downed yearling. She had her hands on the animal's hindquarter, pressing hard against the claw marks, and she was talking to it. Not words exactly, just sound. A low, continuous murmur that said the same thing over and over. I am here. You are not alone. Be still. The yearling stopped thrashing. It lay on its side in the shallow water, breathing hard, its eye rolling white, but it stopped fighting. That was her. That was entirely her. Ansel came down the bank and knelt beside her. He studied the wound. 4 parallel gashes, deep but not fatal. The muscle was torn but not severed. The bleeding was heavy, but already slowing because the cold creek water was doing what cold water does. This needs stitching, Ansel said. I know what it needs, Merritt said without looking up. Ansel took off his coat, the one with the mending and the patches, and tore the lining out in one long strip. He handed it to her without a word. She took it and began binding the wound with quick, efficient hands that had done this before and did not need instruction. He stood and turned to the other yearling, the bay, still locked in its terror. He walked toward it slowly, approaching at an angle. He stopped 4 feet away and stood still and breathed slowly and waited. The yearling blew out through its nostrils, a long, shuddering exhale. Then it dropped its head. Then it took one step toward Ansel and stopped. He reached out, slow as winter, and put his hand on the yearling's neck. The animal flinched once, then leaned into the pressure the way a child leans into a hand it has decided to trust. Behind him, Merritt had gotten the downed yearling to its feet. It was standing in the creek on shaking legs, with its head against her shoulder. She was supporting its weight with her body. 120 pounds of woman, holding up 800 pounds of frightened horse, because the horse had asked her to, and she had said yes. She turned to Ansel across the creek, and for the first time since he had walked into her yard, her face was not a wall. It was not warmth, it was not welcome. But the gate was open. "You shoot well," she said. "I missed on purpose." "I know you did." A pause. The creek moved between them, carrying pink water downstream. "That was my lining," Ansel said, studying his coat. It was the only part that did not have holes. Something happened to her face. A crack in the stonework. The smallest, most reluctant beginning of a smile that had clearly not been used in some time, and was not sure it still remembered how. "I will sew you a new one," she said. They brought both yearlings back together, the bay walking beside Ansel with its nose near his shoulder, the injured one leaning on Merritt, the two of them moving through the pasture in the late golden light like a small battered procession that had fought something and won, though what they had won was not yet clear to either of them. Harlan Voss was standing at the gate. He had been standing there the entire time, standing there, unable to run, unable to help, watching the tree line with the rigid stillness of a man who had already lost one person he loved in a way he could not prevent, and was standing on the edge of losing everything else the same way. He studied the yearlings. He studied Merritt, bloodied and soaking wet and holding a wounded horse upright with nothing but stubbornness. He studied Ansel, coatless, carrying a rifle he had fired once and aimed to miss. Harlan Voss did not say thank you. He said something else. "The bunkhouse is past the barn," he said. "There is a stove in it that works when it wants to. The mattress is not much, but the roof does not leak." Merritt's head turned sharply toward her father. She opened her mouth, and Ansel could see the argument forming, could see every one of the 4 names she had listed at the fence rising up behind her teeth. Harlan held up one hand. "1 week," he said. He was talking to all 3 of them, and the third one was himself. 1 week. "And then we will see." Merritt closed her mouth. She turned to Ansel. He could not read her expression and did not try. "Some things are not meant to be read. They are meant to be waited out." "Thank you," Ansel said. "Do not thank me," Harlan said. "Fix my fence." The bunkhouse was exactly what Harlan had described. A single room with a stove in the corner that had a crack in the firebox and a flue that needed cleaning. The mattress was a canvas tick stuffed with straw that had been restuffed at least twice. There was a nail by the door with a tin basin hanging from it, and a window that faced east, which meant the morning sun would find him whether he wanted finding or not. Ansel set his saddlebag on the floor. He had slept, and worse. He had slept on bare ground in a September rain outside of Trinidad, with nothing over him but a horse blanket that smelled like its previous owner, which had been the horse. This room had walls and a roof and a door that closed, and that was more than enough. He cleaned the flue before he did anything else. Then he built a fire. Then he washed his face and hands in the basin and changed into his other shirt, which was cleaner only in the sense that it had been worn less recently. Then he walked to the house for supper. The kitchen was warm and smelled of beef and onions and something baking that made his stomach clench with a hunger so sudden and so deep that he had to stop in the doorway for a moment and collect himself. He had not sat at a kitchen table in over a year. Merritt was at the stove. She did not turn around. Harlan was at the table with a cup of coffee and a ledger book open in front of him, and he gestured at the chair across from him with the economy of a man who does not waste movement on ceremony. "Sit," Harlan said. Ansel sat. Merritt put a plate in front of him without a word and without meeting his eyes. beef, onions, potatoes, and a biscuit. That was the source of the smell that had nearly undone him in the doorway. He picked up his fork and ate slowly, which took more effort than anything he had done that day, including running into a creek bed after a mountain lion. Every part of his body wanted to eat the way a starving person eats. But he ate slowly, because he understood that this table was not his, that this food was not owed to him, and that the way a person eats in someone else's home is a sentence they are writing about themselves, whether they know it or not. Merritt watched him. He knew she was watching him. He did not look up. 1 week, she said. Yes, ma'am. The ma'am landed in the room and sat there. Merritt considered it the way she might consider a horse that had done something unexpected. Not offended, just surprised. Nobody had called her ma'am before. She was 20 years old, and she had been called plenty of things in Elkhorn, but ma'am was not among them. She did not respond to it. But she did not correct it either. And Ansel, who had learned a long time ago that the things people do not object to are just as important as the things they do, noted that and said nothing more. He fixed the fence first, not because Harlan had told him to, though Harlan had, but because a fence is a statement. It is the first thing a neighbor sees and the last thing a predator tests. And the condition of a fence line tells you everything about the condition of the people behind it. Ansel walked the entire perimeter of the ironweed in 2 days. 600 acres of boundary, through creek bottom and up hillside, and along the ridge where the property met the timber line, and the wind came off the peaks hard enough to loosen posts that had been set in stone. He carried wire and pliers and a post driver and a sack of iron staples, and he worked from first light until he could not see the wire in his hands, and then he worked a little longer by feel. He replaced every weak point, every post plumb, every wire strung tight enough to sing when you tapped it, every joint spliced clean. He simply moved along the boundary of the ironweed like a man stitching a wound closed, one careful length at a time. Merritt noticed. She rode the fence line on the 3rd evening after he had finished the north section, and he knew she rode it because the next morning at breakfast she put an extra biscuit on his plate without comment, and that was her review. The barn hinge took half a day. The east door had been sagging for months, grinding a groove into the dirt floor every time it opened. Ansel pulled both hinges, heated them on the forge, re-welded the crack, and re-hung the door so it swung clean and true. When he was finished, the door that had taken 2 hands and a profanity to open now moved with 1 finger. He found the water problem on the 4th day. He walked the creek upstream for a mile and found a dead elk wedged between 2 boulders, decomposing into the water. He dragged it out, which took 2 hours and most of his vocabulary, and buried it in the tree line. Within a day, the cattle had redistributed across the pasture, grazing the way cattle graze when they are not being pushed away from something by their own noses. Harlan watched all of this from the porch, from the window, from the chair by the barn where he sat on warmer afternoons, whittling pieces of pine into shapes that might have been animals or might have been nothing, just the movement of a knife in hands that needed something to do. He watched, and he said nothing. And Ansel understood that this silence was not indifference. It was the way Harlan Voss gave approval. By not objecting, by not finding fault, by allowing a thing to continue without interference, which, from a man who had spent his life controlling every detail of his operation, was the highest possible praise. The gray mare was the real test, and Ansel knew it. Her name was Sage. Merritt had named her, which meant Merritt had claimed her, which meant that anything Ansel did with that horse would be measured not by whether it worked, but by whether it honored what Merritt had already built. This was a distinction most men would not have understood. Ansel understood it the way he understood weather, not because someone had explained it to him, but because he had lived inside it long enough to feel it before it arrived. He did not touch Sage for the first 5 days. He simply existed near her. He stood at the corral fence while she moved around the enclosure, and he did nothing, did not click, did not call, did not offer grain or sugar or any of the shortcuts that men use to buy a horse's attention when they have not earned its trust. He just stood there and let her see him. Day after day. On the 6th day, Sage walked to the fence and stood near him, not touching, just near. On the 8th day, she put her nose against his shoulder and breathed into his shirt. On the 9th day, Ansel climbed into the corral and began working her from the off side, the right side, the side where the old injury lived like a locked door in the animal's memory. Merritt was watching from the barn. She thought he did not know she was there. He knew. He always knew where she was, the way you always know where the weather is, not because you are watching it, but because you can feel it. By the end of the 2nd week, Sage was accepting a hand on her right pole without flinching. By the end of the 3rd week, she was turning into right-side pressure instead of away from it. She was becoming a horse with 2 sides instead of 1, and the difference it made in her movement and her confidence was visible to anyone who knew what to look at. Merritt knew what to look at. She came to the corral on the 21st day and stood at the fence where Ansel had stood, and she watched Sage move, and her face did something that Ansel had not seen it do before. It softened, not toward him, toward the horse. Toward the change in the horse, which was a kind of healing that Merritt recognized, because she had been trying to do it herself and had not been able to. And watching someone else do it was complicated. It was gratitude and humility and a small, sharp sting of pride all at once, and she let all of those things cross her face because she did not know he was watching. But he was watching, not her face, her hands. Her hands on the fence rail had unclenched at supper. That evening, the conversation changed. It had been brief and functional for 3 weeks. Past the salt, storm coming tomorrow. Fence is finished on the west side. That evening, Merritt asked him a question. How did you know about the pole injury? Ansel considered his plate. I have seen it before, he said. A horse I worked in Colorado had the same thing. Took 2 months with that one. Your mare is smarter. She wanted to trust. She just needed someone to come at it from the right direction. Something moved across Merritt's face. She studied her plate. Harlan, sitting at the head of the table, turned his coffee cup in his hands and said nothing. But Ansel saw the old man's eyes move from Merritt to Ansel and back again, and there was something in that look that was not just observation. It was hope, the cautious, fragile, battered hope of a father watching his daughter lower a wall he had been afraid she would never lower again. The first heavy snow came in late October, early even by Wind River standards. It buried the fences and turned the yard into a white field broken only by the dark lines of boot paths between the house and the barn and the bunkhouse. The cattle were in the near pasture, close enough to feed, and the horses were in the barn, and the world contracted the way it does in mountain country when winter arrives. Everything closer, everything quieter, everything more. They were sitting after supper, the 3 of them. Harlan was in his chair by the fire, whittling. Merritt was on the floor beside the stove, with a piece of harness across her knees, punching new holes in a stirrup leather that had stretched over the summer. Ansel was at the table, sharpening a knife on a stone with slow, rhythmic strokes that filled the room with a sound like breathing. Merritt did not look up from her work. Colorado, she said. Ansel's hand paused on the stone, 1 stroke. Then it resumed. You said the work ended. That is not what happened, is it? The knife moved across the stone. 3 more strokes. 4. No, Ansel said. That is not what happened. Harlan did not look up from his whittling, but the knife in his hands slowed, and the room listened, the way rooms listen when they know something is about to be said that cannot be unsaid. I had a job on a ranch outside of Leadville, Ansel said. Good operation. Big herd, good horses, fair owner, a man named Sedgwick. I worked there for 2 years. Longest I'd stayed anywhere since I left the Panhandle. He put the knife down. I was good at my job. Sedgwick told me so. He started giving me more responsibility. Horses to break for sale. He was talking about making me foreman by the end of the second year. He was quiet for a moment. The fire cracked and settled. Sedgwick had a son, Colton. Colton was supposed to run the ranch someday, and Colton knew it, and Colton did not like watching someone his own age do the job better than he could. He paused. I understood that. I would have felt the same, but I did not know how to fix it except to keep working. And the better I worked, the worse it got. What happened? Merritt asked. She had stopped punching holes. Her hands were still on the leather, but they were not moving. Colton accused me of stealing, Ansel said. $20 from the office. It was not true, and I believe Sedgwick knew it was not true. But Colton was his son, and the accusation was made in front of the other hands, and once a thing like that is said in front of people, it cannot be taken back without someone losing face. And a father will not make his son lose face. That is a law older than any of us. The room was very quiet. Sedgwick paid me what I was owed and told me it would be best if I moved on. He did not meet my eye when he said it. Ansel steadied his hands. I had $60 and a horse, and a reputation that I knew was going to follow me to every ranch in the territory. Because men talk, and the word thief is the kind of word that does not need proof to do its damage. He picked up the knife again but did not sharpen it, just held it. I sold the horse in Rollins because I needed the money to eat. I walked from Rollins to here. 11 days. 60 miles on foot through the mountains with September already turning cold. He studied the fire. I am not a thief, but I cannot prove that to you except by staying long enough for you to see it for yourselves. Nobody spoke. The wind hit the side of the house, and the logs creaked and the fire drew hard for a moment before settling back. Harlan set down his whittling knife. He studied Ansel for a long moment. Then he said something that Ansel did not expect. 60 miles, Harlan said. You walked 60 miles with no horse and no coat worth the name. Ansel said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. The fact of it was enough. Harlan picked up his knife and went back to his whittling. After a while he said without looking up, a man who walks 60 miles to find work is not a man who steals $20. Merritt turned to her father. Then she turned to Ansel. Then she picked up the awl and went back to the stirrup leather. And nobody said anything else for a long time, and the silence in the room was a different kind of silence than it had been before. It was the silence of a door that had been opened and left open. Aldous Crane came on a Tuesday in November, 3 days after the first snowmelt that opened the road. He came in a wagon, not on horseback, which told Ansel everything he needed to know before the man stepped down. A wagon says I am a person of consequence. A wagon says I do not ride to you. I am delivered. A wagon, in November, on a mountain road that would punish a horse, says I have enough that discomfort is someone else's problem. There were 2 men on horseback flanking the wagon. They were not cowboys. They wore their coats open in spite of the cold, which meant they wanted access to what was underneath. Merritt was in the barn working sage. Ansel was at the north fence replacing a post. He saw the wagon from 300 yards and dropped his tools and walked toward the house at a deliberate pace. Not running, not strolling. Harlan was already on the porch, standing with one hand on the porch post, his face the face of a man confronting something he has been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Crane, Harlan said. He said it to the air, to the yard, to the 10 years of history between himself and the man in the wagon. Ansel reached the porch and stood at the bottom of the steps. He did not go up. The porch was Harlan's. The wagon stopped at the gate. Aldous Crane stepped down. He was a tall man, and he wore his wealth quietly in the quality of the cloth rather than the flash of it. A face that had been handsome once and was now just powerful, which is what happens to handsome when it gets everything at once for long enough. Harlan, Crane said. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that has been used so many times, for the same purpose, that it has worn smooth, like a tool. I was hoping we could talk. We have talked, Aldous. We have talked every year for 3 years. My answer has not changed. Crane glanced at Ansel. And who is this? Ansel Cade. I work this ranch. Crane dismissed him with a glance and turned back to Harlan. I'm not going to make the same offer I have made before. The territory is changing. The railroad survey crew came through in September. You know what that means for land values. In 2 years, this property will be worth 3 times what I am offering you today. Then I will sell it in 2 years, Harlan said. Crane's smile did not waver. You will not be here in 2 years, Harlan. Everybody knows that, I'm sorry to say it, but it is true, and pretending otherwise does not help either of us. The air changed. Not the temperature, not the wind. The air between the two men changed in the way that air changes when something has been said that was true and cruel and deliberate, and all 3 of those qualities were load-bearing. Harlan's hand tightened on the porch post. Ansel saw the knuckles go white. He saw the effort it took to keep his voice level, and he understood that Aldous Crane had just done something far more violent than anything the 2 men on horseback were capable of. He had used a dying man's death against him. This land goes to my daughter, Harlan said. His voice was quiet and very steady. Merritt runs this ranch. She will continue to run it. Crane sighed. It was a practiced sigh. Pert. Harlan, your daughter is a remarkable young woman. But this valley is not kind to remarkable young women running cattle operations alone. You know the winters, you know the market. You know what happens when the banks tighten and the only thing between a ranch and foreclosure is a signature that the bank trusts. He let the words settle like snow, quiet, cold, and covering everything. They will not lend to her, Harlan. You know they will not. And when they do not, she will lose this place and she will lose it, for less than I am offering you right now. The barn door opened. Merritt walked out. She had heard everything, or enough of everything, because her face was not the face of a woman who had been surprised. It was the face of a woman who had been right about something she had hoped to be wrong about. She walked to the fence and stood beside Ansel. She did not turn to him. She faced Aldous Crane. Your son asked me to marry him, she said. Her voice carried across the yard without effort. I said no. He went home and told you that I was rude and wild and impossible, and you decided that if you could not acquire this ranch through your son's bed, you would acquire it through my father's sphere. One of the riders shifted in his saddle. Crane's smile disappeared. She is going to be a problem, one of the riders said quietly to the other. He said it low, but the yard was still in sound carries in the mountains the way light carries on water. Merritt turned to the rider. Say that louder, she said. The rider did not say it louder. Ansel had not moved. He had not spoken since giving his name. He stood at the fence beside Merritt, aware of everything. The 2 riders and their open coats. Harlan on the porch with his white knuckles and his labored breathing. Merritt beside him, vibrating with a fury so controlled it was almost invisible. Mr. Crane, Ansel said. His voice was quiet. It was the quietness of a man who does not need volume because he has something more useful, which is certainty. This ranch is not for sale. Miss Voss will continue to operate it. And any future business you have with the ironweed should be conducted through proper channels, in daylight, without escorts. The 2 riders studied him. They saw a young man in a mended coat with no weapon visible, standing at a fence in the cold. And they saw something in the way he stood that was not aggression, and not fear, and not performance. It was ground. He was standing on ground he had decided was his, and the decision had been made somewhere deep enough that it was no longer a decision, but a fact. Crane considered Ansel for a long time. Then he considered Merritt. Then, Harlan on the porch. This is a mistake, Crane said. Merritt smiled. It was the most dangerous smile Ansel had ever seen. It was the smile of a woman who has been underestimated so many times that she has stopped being insulted by it and started finding it useful. Probably, she said. But it is our mistake to make. Crane got back in his wagon. The 2 riders fell in behind him. The wagon turned on the road and moved away down the valley, and the sound of it faded and the yard was quiet again. Harlan sat down on the porch step. He sat down heavily, the way a man sits down when the thing holding him up lets go. Merritt went to him and put her hand on his shoulder and did not say anything, and Harlan put his hand over hers and did not say anything. And the conversation they had in that silence was longer and more complete than anything Aldous Crane had said in the yard. Ansel stood at the fence and said nothing. He was not part of that silence, not yet. But he stood near it, and he guarded it, and that was enough. That evening, Merritt did something she had never done. She walked to the bunkhouse and knocked on the door. Ansel opened it. He was in his other shirt, the less dirty one, and his hair was wet from the basin. She studied him with an expression he could not read. "Come to supper," she said. It was what she said every evening, but she had never come to the bunkhouse to say it. She had always called it from the porch, or not said it at all because it was understood. Coming to the door was different. Coming to the door was a crossing. They ate in near silence. Harlan was tired, the deep kind of tired that sleep does not fix. He ate half his plate and pushed the rest away and sat with his coffee watching the fire. After Merritt cleared the table, Harlan said, "Sit down, both of you." Merritt sat. Ansel sat. Harlan considered his daughter, then Ansel, and something moved behind his eyes. The slow turning of a thought that has been circling for weeks, looking for a place to land. "I am not going to pretend with either of you," Harlan said. Crane was right about one thing. "I do not have 2 years. Merritt's hand went flat on the table. "Pa, let me say this," Harlan said. His voice was not sad. It was steady, the way a fence post is steady when it has been set deep. Dr. Aldridge told me what it is, and I told him to keep it to himself. It is my chest, the lungs. There is nothing to be done about it that is not already being done, which is continuing to breathe until breathing stops. He paused. "I am telling you this because what I am about to say will not make sense without it." Merritt's eyes were bright. She did not blink. She did not cry. She sat very still, the way she sat with a frightened horse, holding everything inside herself so that nothing she felt would spill outward and make the moment harder than it already was. Harlan turned to Ansel. "You have been here 7 weeks, he said. In those 7 weeks you have done more for this ranch than the last 4 men combined. You have repaired every fence. You have found problems I did not know I had. You have trained a horse that my daughter could not reach, and you did it without diminishing what she had already done, which is a thing I did not know a man could do until I watched you do it." He coughed once, quietly, into his hand. Merritt's eyes moved to the hand. Ansel saw what she was looking for, and he saw that she did not find it, and he understood what that meant. "But that is not why I am asking. What I am about to ask," Harlan said. "I am asking because of today. Because Aldous Crane stood in my yard and told me my daughter would fail, and you stood at the fence beside her, and you did not step in front of her. You stood beside her. Do you understand the difference?" Ansel was quiet. "Yes," he said. "I do." "Most men would not," Harlan said. "Most men would have spoken over her. Most men would have tried to protect her by putting themselves between her and the thing that needed facing. That is what they think protection means. They think it means standing in front." He studied Ansel. "You knew better. You stood beside her and let her say what needed to be said, and then you said what needed to be said, and neither of you stepped on the other. That is not something you can teach a person." The fire moved in the grate. Outside the wind had died, and the night was still and cold and enormous. "I want you to stay," Harlan said. "Not as a hand, not as an employee. I want to draw up a partnership, 30% of the ironweed. Your name on the deed beside mine and Merritt's." The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet, when something has been said that changes the shape of everything inside them. The fire still moved, the logs still creaked, but the human sound stopped. The breathing and the shifting and the small unconscious noises that people make, all of it paused as if the room itself was holding its breath. Merritt was watching her father. Her expression was not surprise. It was something more complicated, something that lived in the territory between recognition and fear, because she had seen this coming and had not let herself see it, and now it was. "Here, Pa," she said, "you do not have to." "I know, I do not have to," Harlan said. "I want to. There is a difference between those two things, and I have spent 57 years learning it." He turned to Ansel. "In 3 years, maybe less, this ranch will need someone besides Merritt, not because she is not capable. Because 600 acres and 40 head of cattle and a mountain winter is more than one person can hold alone. I learned that. She will learn it. And when she does, I want the person standing beside her to be someone who has already proved that they know where to stand." Ansel studied the table. His hands were on his knees, and they were very still, the way hands get still when everything behind them is moving. "I walked here from Rollins," Ansel said. "I had 14 cents and a saddlebag and a name that had been ruined by a man who could not stand to see someone else do his job." He met Harlan's eyes. "I have thought about that every day since. What it means to have something taken from you by someone who does not even want it, who only wants you not to have it, and I have thought about what it would mean to be given something by someone who wants you to have it, who is choosing you, not because there is no one else, but because they believe you are the right one." Harlan held his gaze. "That is what I believe," he said. Merritt was quiet. She was watching Ansel, and her face was open in a way that Ansel had never seen it. Not soft, not warm, open. The face of a woman who has kept every door in her life locked and bolted, and who is watching someone else hold a key she did not know existed. "You do not know me," Ansel said. 7 weeks is not enough to know a person." Harlan almost smiled. "Son, I knew the day you shot above that cat's head instead of at it. A man who chooses not to kill when killing would be easier is a man I can trust with my land." He paused. "And with my daughter, though she would probably put me through a wall for saying so." Merritt made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a protest. It was somewhere in between, and it was the most human sound Ansel had heard her make. Ansel studied the table. Then he turned to Merritt, then to Harlan. "I will not let this place down," he said. "I know," Harlan said, "and that is exactly why this offer is yours." Merritt stood up. She walked to the cupboard and took out a bottle that Ansel had not seen before. It was whiskey, and from the level of dust on it, it had not been touched in a very long time. She brought it to the table with 3 glasses, not 2, and set them down and poured without asking. Harlan studied the 3 glasses. He studied his daughter. His eyes were wet, and he did not hide it, and Ansel saw in that moment exactly where Merritt had gotten her honesty. Not from a lesson, from a man who let true things be true. "Your mother would have poured 4, Harlan said. Merritt picked up her glass. "She would have," she said, "and then she would have told you to stop talking and drink." Harlan laughed. It was a real laugh, not a large one, and it cost him a cough at the end, but it was real. He picked up his glass. Ansel picked up his. They drank. The fire moved. The night held the house in its cold hands, and the house held the 3 of them in its warm ones, and for the first time since Ansel Cade had walked away from a ranch in Colorado with a false name on his back, the weight of it lifted. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. Crane did not come back. The partnership was filed with the county clerk in Lander within the week, and the attorney that Harlan had engaged, a quiet, precise woman named Prentice, had sent a letter to Crane's lawyer that Merritt summarized for Ansel one evening with the words, "She told him that if he set foot on this property again, the next conversation would happen in a courtroom, and she would enjoy it." The winter came down hard in December. Not the killing cold of the high peaks, but the long, grinding, relentless cold of the valley floor, where the temperature drops and stays dropped, and the mornings are a negotiation between the body's desire to remain under blankets and the livestock's indifference to that desire. Ansel worked through it. He fed cattle in the dark and broke ice on the water troughs before dawn, and spent hours in the barn checking the 1,000 small indicators that separate a healthy herd from one that is quietly declining. Merritt worked beside him. Something had shifted in the geometry of the ironweed, and the shape it made now required 2 people moving through it together. Merritt would consider a section of fence, and Ansel would nod, and one of them would go left, and the other would go right, and they would meet at the far end, and the fence would be done. She would begin moving cattle, and he would appear at the gate without being called, and the cattle would flow between them like water through a channel, not because they were forced, but because the channel was shaped right. Harlan watched this from the window. He watched it every day, and what he saw made him both deeply happy and deeply sad, and the 2 feelings did not cancel each other out but existed side by side the way they do in people who have lived long enough to understand that this is how most important feelings work. His cough was worse. He spent more afternoons in the chair by the fire. He whittled less. And on the mornings when he did come to the barn, he moved with the terrible, dignified slowness of a man making each trip count because he knows the number is finite. One morning in January, Ansel found Merritt standing at the corral fence at dawn, before the chores, before the light had fully committed to the day. She was watching Sage move through the corral in the cold air, the mare's breath coming in white plumes, her movement easy and balanced on both sides now whole. Merritt did not turn to Ansel when he came and stood beside her. She did not say good morning. She said something else. He is not going to see the spring. Ansel was quiet. The cold pressed against them. Sage moved through the pre-dawn light like a ghost made of muscle and breath. "I know," Ansel said. Merritt gripped the fence rail. "I have known for months. He thinks he is protecting me by not telling me, and I am protecting him by not telling him I know, and we are both pretending, and I am so tired of pretending." Her voice did not break. It was the voice of a person who had been holding something heavy for so long that the weight had become part of her posture, part of her breathing, part of the way she stood at fence rails at dawn and watched horses move through the cold. Ansel did not touch her. He understood that Merritt Voss was not a person who wanted to be held together by someone else's hands. She was a person who held herself together, and what she needed was not someone to carry the weight, but someone to stand close enough that she knew she was not carrying it alone. So he stood. He stood beside her at the fence in the cold, and he said nothing else. And the sky brightened by degrees, and Sage came to the fence and put her nose against Merritt's hand and breathed warm air across her fingers. After a while Merritt said, "I do not know how to do this without him." "You will not do it without him," Ansel said. "Everything he taught you is in you. Everything he built is under your feet. He does not leave when he leaves. He just changes where he is." Merritt turned her head and studied him. Her eyes were wet, and she did not wipe them, and she did not look away. She just let it be there. The grief, and the fear, and the gratitude, and the thing underneath, all of those that she had not named yet and was not ready to name. "You are going to stay," she said. It was not a question. It was something in between. A sentence that lived in the territory where hope meets certainty, where a person says out loud the thing they have been afraid to believe in, case saying it makes it disappear. "Yes," Ansel said. Merritt nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Then she pushed off the fence and turned toward the barn, because the cattle needed feeding and the ice needed breaking, and the day did not wait for grief or for hope or for any of the things that people feel when they are standing at the edge of losing something and finding something at the same time. Ansel watched her walk to the barn. Then he followed. The winter held. February was the worst of it. 3 weeks of cold so deep it cracked the water lines and froze the barn latch. They fed cattle in the dark and fixed what broke and ate supper at the table. The 3 of them. And the conversations were shorter now because Harlan's breath was shorter. But they were not smaller. They talked about the spring, about which pastures to rotate first and what price they might get for the yearlings at the Lander sale. They talked about the future as if the future were a certainty, because that is what people do when the alternative is unacceptable. Harlan whittled less. But one evening in February he handed Ansel a small carved figure. It was a horse, a mare standing with her head turned slightly to the right, both ears forward. Ansel held it for a long time. "That is Sage," Harlan said. "From the right side, her good side, now." Ansel closed his hand around it and said thank you, and meant it in a way that the words were not large enough to hold. March came, slowly, not all at once, but in arguments. A warm day, then a cold one. A thaw, then a freeze. And then one morning the sound of water running free. The sound of a creek that has been locked under ice for 4 months, finally saying what it has been holding in. The grass came back on the south pasture first, green under the brown, tentative, barely there, but there. Merritt stood at the fence, and Ansel stood beside her, and neither of them said anything because the grass said it for them. We are still here. On the first warm evening of April, Ansel was sitting on the top rail of the south fence, watching the cattle move through the new grass. The sun was low, and the light was the color of honey, and the Wind River Range held its snow on the high peaks against a sky so blue it did not look real. Merritt climbed up beside him. She climbed fences, the way she did everything, directly and without apology. She sat beside him, and they were quiet for a while. "You wrote to someone," she said. Ansel turned to her. He had posted a letter in Elkhorn 2 days before, and he had not mentioned it. The postmaster's wife told Bridie Tillman. Merritt said, "Bridie Tillman told the woman at the general store. The woman at the general store told me when I went in for flour." She studied him. Small towns. Ansel was quiet for a moment. "I wrote to Sedgwick," he said, "the man in Colorado. I told him where I am. I told him that I am not what his son said I was, and that I do not need him to believe me, but that I wanted him to know." Merritt considered the cattle, the fence line, tight and straight, every post driven right. The barn, with its new hinge and its solid roof. The house where her father was sitting by the window watching them, a blanket across his knees and a carved horse in his hands. "You know what my father said about you," she said. "The night after the cat. After you shot above its head. He did not tell me. He told me." She paused. He said, "That boy understands that strength is not the same as force." She turned to Ansel. "My father has never said that about anyone, including himself." Ansel was quiet. Below them the cattle moved through the long evening grass, and Sage was in the near pasture standing with her head over the fence, watching them with both ears forward, and somewhere in the timber a bird was singing the particular song that birds sing when the day is ending, and they want the record to show that they were here for it. "They told me you were too wild for any man," Ansel said. "In Elkhorn, before I walked up here. They said it like a warning." Merritt turned to him. "And what did you think?" Ansel was quiet for a moment, considering the ranch and the mountains and the sky and the woman beside him who had fought for every single thing she had and had never once asked anyone to fight for her, only to fight beside her, which is a different thing and a harder thing and the thing that matters most. "I thought you were perfect," he said. Merritt did not smile. She did something better than smile. She leaned 2 inches to the right, which closed the distance between them on the fence rail, and her shoulder touched his shoulder, and she left it there. They sat like that for a long time, watching the light change on the mountains, while behind them in the house Harlan Voss watched them from the window and held the carved horse in his hands and felt something he had not felt since Lenora. Not the absence of loss. Loss does not leave a person. It just settles into the walls and becomes part of the house, and after a while you stop noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of the creek. It is always there. But other sounds come, and the other sounds were there now. The sound of 2 people working in the barn in the morning, the sound of a creek running free, the sound of a fence line that would hold through whatever came next, the sound of his daughter laughing, which she had started doing again, quietly. In small moments when she thought no one was listening, though someone always was. The sound of a place that had remembered what it was for. You do not always know the moment when the wandering ends. Sometimes you only know it looking back. But Ansel knew. He had known it, he thought, since the ridge. Since he had watched a woman in a corral move with a wild horse-like music, and something inside him that had been closed had opened, and he had walked down off the ridge toward a life he did not know was waiting for him. Sometimes the place you stop is the place that was always yours. You just had to walk far enough to find it.